There are men who once walked through battlefields like heroes, and yet, years later, they quietly sleep on train station benches, forgotten, nameless. They didn't die in war, they simply vanished from the memory of everyone. That day, a homeless veteran silently walked into the city courthouse. People whispered. They kept their distance, eyeing him like a troublemaker. No one knew that this very man had once risked his life to save the judge now sitting on the bench. What you're about to witness is the story that made an entire courtroom rise to their feet in silence. And the moment America had to ask itself, what have we done to the ones who once sacrificed everything for us? In the next 30 minutes, you will follow the haunting journey of a homeless veteran from the trenches to a jail cell. Uncover the truth hidden in a battered old backpack, filled with medals no one ever cared to open. And witness how a man abandoned by society made a courtroom bow their heads in apology. But before we begin, ask yourself one question. How many times have you walked past a homeless person and never looked back? If you believe that heroes should never be forgotten, keep watching until the end, because this isn't just a story about one man. It's a wake-up call for us all. Main Street was quiet that morning in Lexington, Kentucky. The kind of quiet that feels a little too still, a little too forgotten. A fine layer of fog hung low over the sidewalk, softening the edges of cracked concrete and flickering streetlights. The rain had stopped, but everything still smelled like cold metal and wet dust. And then he appeared. An old man, limping, wearing a threadbare army jacket 2 sizes too big, a navy ball cap pulled low over eyes that had seen more than they should. He carried a duffel bag, stained and heavy, dragging slightly behind him like it carried the weight of a different lifetime. No one stopped him. No one asked his name. He passed by a coffee shop. The barista inside glanced up, then looked right back down at her phone. A couple walking their golden retriever crossed the street to avoid him. Even the teenage kid on a skateboard didn't make a joke. He just kept rolling. To them, he was just another homeless veteran. One more silent figure blending into the background of a city too busy to care. But what they didn't know was that this man had once led a unit through the streets of Fallujah. He had once carried a fellow soldier half a mile under sniper fire, barefoot, bleeding, and unarmed. He had once been saluted. His name, Elijah Brandt. And on this day, this gray, forgettable morning, he was walking straight into the courthouse that had already written him off as nothing more than a nuisance. His charge? Aggravated assault and resisting removal from a public mall. He was just trying to stay dry. But the truth was buried in the seams of that old duffel bag, and if anyone had taken 5 seconds to unzip it, they would have found medals, service citations, and a photo of a much younger Elijah standing in a sandstorm with a smile that said, "I made it out." They would have known, but no one did. Not yet. And that's where this story begins. Not with the arrest, not even with the mistake, but with the silence. The silence around a man who had once been a hero and was now just a ghost to everyone else. But ghosts don't stay ghosts forever, because just a few blocks away, someone else had started asking questions. And by the time this day was over, the name Elijah Brandt would make an entire courtroom stand. Before the duffel bag, before the courtroom, before the word vagrant was stapled to his name like a warning label. There was Captain Elijah Brandt. He was 29 the first time he saw real fire. Not training, not simulation, the real kind. With heat so intense it warped the mirrors on Humvees and turned sand into glass. It was Fallujah, 2004, a mission that changed him forever. Elijah led a Marine unit nicknamed the Dust Hounds. 10 men, young and green, most of them straight out of Georgia and West Virginia. Elijah was older than most, married, calm, the one who wrote letters for the others when they couldn't find the words to send home. One night, a mortar hit their position. 3 injured, 1 missing, and a young lieutenant named Alan Monroe, bleeding out under twisted steel. Elijah didn't hesitate. He crawled through fire, pulled Monroe out of the wreckage with shrapnel in his leg and smoke burning his lungs. He carried the man half conscious to the evac zone under enemy fire, both of them barely breathing. That act earned him a Silver Star. But Elijah never mentioned it again. Not because it didn't matter, but because to him it wasn't heroism. It was duty. It was loyalty. It was what you did. When he came home, the cheers lasted a month, maybe 2. Then came the silence. His wife had left, his VA paperwork was delayed, jobs didn't call back, nightmares did. He tried, he really did. Worked odd jobs, painting, warehouse shifts, security gigs that paid just enough to keep him afloat. But the memories clung to him like ash. The sound of mortars, the smell of diesel and blood. He didn't complain. Elijah Brandt wasn't that kind of man. But slowly, the world forgot about him. And so, little by little, he disappeared. First from his old friend circles, then from employment records, then from housing databases. Until one day, he was just another homeless veteran sleeping behind a gas station on the edge of town, clutching a bag that held everything the government once promised to honor. He never begged, never asked for anything. But if you passed him in the street, he might nod at you, polite as ever. And if you asked, "Were you in the service?" he'd only smile and say, "A long time ago." It's easy to ask, how does a hero end up like that? But maybe the better question is, how did we let that happen and not even notice? Because Elijah Brandt isn't the only one. Tonight, in cities across America, over 35,000 homeless veterans are doing the exact same thing. Trying to stay dry, trying to stay warm, trying to stay human. Men and women who once stood guard for a nation now sleep in its blind spots. And yet, like Elijah, they keep going. Not because life has been kind, but because somewhere inside they still believe they matter, even if no one else does. It wasn't the war that broke him. It wasn't the pain or the silence or the hunger. It was this, a single moment, one bottle, and a courtroom that didn't even ask his name. That's how a hero became a threat, and how the system failed a homeless veteran for the 1,000th time. It was raining that day. Not a downpour, just that cold, steady drizzle that seeps into your bones and makes everything feel heavier. Elijah had spent the night beneath the loading dock of a grocery store. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. His coat was soaked. His duffel bag, everything he owned, was starting to mold at the seams. Around 10 a.m., he walked into Lexington Commons Mall, not to cause trouble, just to get dry, maybe find a warm corner to sit. Maybe, if luck allowed, someone might offer him a coffee or just a glance that wasn't filled with pity or fear. Instead, a mall security guard spotted him by the entrance. "Sir, you can't be in here like that," the guard said. Elijah didn't argue. He just nodded, mumbled, "I'll leave," and turned to go. But as he picked up his bag, something slipped. A glass bottle, half filled with rainwater, rolled out and hit the floor. The guard, startled, stepped forward quickly. Elijah, startled too, reached down fast. Too fast. The bottle hit the guard's leg. Not hard, but just enough to make him stumble. And that was enough. In the age of smartphones and security footage, even accidents become evidence. Police were called. Elijah was arrested, charged with assault, resisting removal, disorderly conduct. The report didn't mention that he was hungry, or that he had nodded respectfully, or that he said he was leaving before the bottle fell. No. It only said, male suspect, approximately 60 to 65 years old, appeared disheveled, refused to cooperate, used object to strike security personnel. And just like that, Captain Elijah Brandt, Silver Star recipient, Dusthound's commander, was reduced to 6 cold lines in a police report. No one asked if he was a veteran. No one noticed the military patch still sewn, barely holding on his sleeve. No one wondered why a man would carry a duffel bag in the rain, refuse to argue, and accept handcuffs like he'd worn them before. They just processed him, like data. This is what a broken system looks like. It doesn't always scream injustice. Sometimes it whispers. It hums along quietly, stamping papers, filing charges, moving people through metal detectors and courtroom doors without ever looking in their eyes. It's not always cruel by design, but it's indifferent. And indifference is often worse, especially to a homeless veteran who's been forgotten once already. Elijah didn't have a lawyer when he first stood before the court. He didn't have a friend, didn't have a voice, only that same old bag tossed in an evidence locker and a name no one thought to Google, until someone did. But we'll get to that. Because before redemption comes the weight of being misjudged. And Elijah Brandt was about to feel the full weight of a justice system that had no idea who it was trying to punish. The courtroom smelled like old wood and cold air. Elijah Brandt stood still near the defendant's table. Coat damp, cuffs removed, eyes lowered. He didn't look like a soldier. He looked like someone the world had left behind. The bailiff called the case. Case number 732A, Commonwealth of Kentucky versus Elijah Brandt. No one looked up, not at first. Then a few chuckles, a cough, and the whisper that never failed to show up when a man like Elijah walked into a room, another homeless guy, waste of time. Across the aisle, the assistant district attorney adjusted his tie. Young, ambitious, sharp like a blade that had never been tested. Your Honor, he began, this defendant is a known vagrant, a disturbance to the public, a man who assaulted mall security simply because he was asked to leave. The prosecutor waved toward Elijah. We're asking for no leniency. Past behavior suggests future risk. This is not a soldier. This is a threat. No mention of Elijah's medals. No mention of his service. No mention of the fact that he had simply tried to get out of the rain. His public defender was fresh out of law school. Her hands trembled as she flipped through a thin folder. She hadn't even spoken to Elijah yet. And when the judge asked for a statement, she stood and said, Your Honor, my client accepts the charge. We are only seeking a lighter sentence. Elijah's brow furrowed. He opened his mouth slightly, confused. That wasn't what he wanted to say. That wasn't the truth. But before he could speak, the judge raised a hand. Save it, Mr. Brandt, he said flatly. You'll have your turn. But Elijah knew that tone. He'd heard it before from officers, from caseworkers, from people who smiled with their mouths but never with their eyes. It was the tone people used when they had already decided who you were. And that's the thing. Once someone sees you as a homeless veteran, they often forget the veteran part and only focus on the homeless. To the system, Elijah wasn't a decorated Marine captain anymore. He was a file, a problem, a statistic, a man they thought had already wasted his chances. No one asked what Fallujah smelled like in the summer. No one asked how it felt to carry a man through fire. No one asked when he last ate. But there was one man in that courtroom who couldn't stop looking at Elijah. Deputy Noah Rivers. He stood quietly near the back, flipping through case paperwork. When he saw the defendant's name, Brandt Elijah, something clicked. He'd heard that name before, not on the streets, but in an old military report his father once told him about. Noah leaned closer, watched Elijah's shoulders, saw the stiffness, the way a soldier stands, even when tired, and he began to wonder, what if we got this wrong? What if this wasn't just another case file? Because sometimes the difference between justice and tragedy is one person who decides to ask a second question. And for homeless veterans like Elijah, those second questions almost never come. Not in courtrooms, not in shelters, not in society. That's the heartbreak of it all. We tell our soldiers, thank you for your service. We watch them march in parades. We post hashtags on Memorial Day. But when the uniform fades, when the medals go into a bag, and when the hero falls through the cracks, we look the other way until someone doesn't. They didn't send Elijah Brandt to prison because he was dangerous. They sent him there because they didn't know who he was. And inside those walls where mercy runs dry, being forgotten is often more painful than being punished. Southridge Correctional Facility sat on the edge of town like a scar, gray, heavy, surrounded by razor wire and apathy, the kind of place built not for rehabilitation, but for forgetting. Elijah arrived just after noon. The cuffs left deep red marks on his wrists. The cold air bit through his coat. No one spoke to him. Not the guards, not the other inmates, not even the intake officer, who glanced at his file and muttered, "Another one, room D12. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps. The halls smelled of bleach and rust. And as Elijah was led to his cell, he passed faces that barely looked up, faces like his own, tired, weathered, worn. His cellmate was already there. Younger, tattooed, a man named Vince with a sharp tongue and an even sharper chip on his shoulder. "You're the vet they tossed in with me?" Vince scoffed. "Thought they were sending in trouble, not Grandpa." Elijah said nothing. He placed his duffel bag, what was left of it, under the bottom bunk and sat quietly. Prison is loud in strange ways, not from shouting, but from small cruelties. Laughter that bites, doors that slam harder than they need to. The silence of guards who see blood and look the other way. During meals, Elijah sat alone. Gray oatmeal, cold toast. No one joined him. Some stared, some whispered. And one morning, a tray slammed down next to him, splattering food across his chest. Vince stood nearby, arms folded. "No reflexes, soldier boy? What did you do anyway? Steal valor from yourself?" Another inmate laughed. Elijah didn't. He didn't fight back, not because he couldn't, but because he knew the cost. In war, every fight has a purpose. In prison, most are just noise. So he stood up, wiped the oatmeal from his jacket, and walked away. Later that night, lying on his cold bunk, Elijah reached into the lining of his coat and touched something small and worn. A dog tag. Scratched. Bent. Still engraved with a name no one cared to remember. He whispered into the dark just loud enough for the walls to hear. Elijah Brandt. This is what it means to be a homeless veteran in America. Not just to lose your home, but to lose your place, to lose the right to be seen, even when you've bled for the right to belong. In prison, Elijah was no different from any other man in Orange, except he was. Because behind the silence, behind the broken shoes and tired eyes, was someone who had once carried wounded soldiers through fire, and still, no one asked. Until someone did. It only takes one person to ask, what's his name again? And sometimes that question is enough to turn an entire story around. Deputy Noah Rivers didn't think this shift would be any different. He'd walked those gray prison halls for 3 years, posted charts, filed reports, broke up fights. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't heroic. But that day, something pulled at him. He had just updated the inmate labor list when he saw Elijah walk past, slowly, hunched, bleeding from a cut above the eye. The old man nodded at him, barely. Noah nodded back, and then paused. There was something in the way Elijah carried himself, not like a man defeated, but like someone who had learned to take pain quietly, like someone who had been trained not to react. He turned to the clerk beside him. What's that guy's name again? The clerk glanced at the form. Brandt. Elijah Brandt. Noah froze. The name stirred something in his mind, a memory from years ago. His father, also a veteran, once told him a story about a Marine captain who carried a wounded officer out of Fallujah in 2004. The officer survived. The captain disappeared. No one ever found out who he was, until now. That evening, Noah stayed late at his desk. He pulled up the military database, typed Elijah Brandt, and there it was. Captain Elijah M. Brandt, USMC, Silver Star recipient, Operation Phantom Fury, 2004. Rescued Letter Allen Monroe during enemy fire. Carried 180 yards under mortar threat. Multiple citations, honorably discharged. Noah leaned back in his chair, stunned. They arrested a Silver Star recipient for getting rained on in a mall. He picked up the phone. Hey, he said to the prison evidence room. Do we still have access to court file 732A? I need to check a duffel bag. Why? The voice grunted. Because the man they locked up isn't just another homeless veteran. He's a war hero. The next day, Noah made another call. To a number few in the prison dared dial directly. Office of Judge Monroe. This is Beth. Noah cleared his throat. Hi, this is Deputy Rivers from South Ridge Correctional. I need to speak to the judge. He's in session. Tell him it's about Fallujah, July 2004. Someone named Elijah Brandt. Tell him the man who saved his life is in our prison. There was silence. And then, I'll call you back. In his cell, Elijah sat on the edge of his bunk, mending a rip in his coat with a safety pin. His eyes were heavy, but his hands worked slowly, steady, like they had done this 1,000 times before. He didn't know someone had just made a call for him, didn't know his name was being spoken aloud, finally, with reverence. Didn't know that for the first time in years, someone saw him. Not as a problem, but as a person worth remembering, a person worth saving, a person who had once carried others, and now maybe someone would carry him. Because in a world that forgets so easily, sometimes justice starts with someone who simply pays attention, especially when it comes to a homeless veteran, someone who served, sacrificed, and then fell through the cracks so quietly you wouldn't even notice, unless you were looking. What happens when the man you condemned turns out to be the man who once saved your life? For Judge Allen Monroe, justice wasn't just a principle anymore. It had a name, Elijah Brandt. The morning was like any other. Judge Monroe had just finished reading over 2 custody disputes and a petty theft case. His clerk brought in the day's docket. He signed without looking, until Beth, his longtime assistant, knocked gently on the door, not with another file, but with a whisper. Sir, there's something you need to see. She laid a single sheet of paper on his desk. Monroe glanced at it, disinterested, then froze. At the top, the name, Brandt, Elijah M. Beneath it, Silver Star citation, Fallujah, Operation Phantom Fury, July 2004. Rescued then Lieutenant Allen Monroe from mortar fire. His own name, His own story, the air left the room. For 3 decades, he had carried that memory like a ghost, a voice screaming over gunfire, a strong arm lifting him out of the rubble, a pair of hands pressing into his chest to stop the bleeding. He had never known who saved him, never even saw the man's face. But now, staring at the document, he did, and horror sank in. He had sentenced Elijah to prison, mocked him, never once looked up from the bench long enough to realize the man standing before him was not just another homeless defendant. He was the reason Monroe was even alive. He dropped the file. His hands trembled. "Cancel my afternoon docket," he told his clerk, "and get me the full case file on Elijah Brandt. Every page, every charge, every photo." Within the hour, the phone at South Ridge rang. The intercom crackled in Elijah's cell. "Inmate Brandt, prepare for transport. Immediate court summons." Elijah blinked. "What for?" No one answered. They only helped him up and let him out. Cuffs looser this time, movements gentler, though he didn't know why. Outside the courthouse, something felt different. The air, the light. Even the guards who once pulled him like luggage now stepped aside. Waiting on the courthouse steps was Deputy Noah Rivers, holding a navy blue coat. "It's cold," he said softly, draping it over Elijah's shoulders. "Figured you might want to walk in on your own terms today." Inside, the marble floors shone. Reporters whispered, but not in mockery. Some even put down their cameras as Elijah passed, as if understanding this moment wasn't to be captured but witnessed. In courtroom 4, Judge Monroe stood, no robe, no bench, no pretense. Just a man, facing the one person he could never repay. Their eyes met. Elijah froze. Monroe stepped forward, file in hand, voice trembling. "It was you. You were the one who pulled me out of that crater." Elijah didn't answer. "I never knew your name," Monroe whispered, "and when I finally heard it, I had already failed you." He stepped closer, and then, before the court, the press, and the world, he knelt. A collective gasp echoed across the room. "I sentenced you without knowing who you were. I let the system turn you into a number, but you were never a number to begin with. You were the man who saved my life." And in that stillness, for the first time in years, Elijah Brandt's name meant something again. Not just to him, but to everyone watching. To every veteran who'd ever been forgotten. To every soul swallowed by silence. To every judge, officer, or citizen who had ever failed to look closer. Because a homeless veteran is still a veteran. Still a human being. Still someone's brother, father, friend, or sometimes savior. And when we forget that, we don't just fail them, we fail ourselves. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, but it can change the ending. And for a man like Elijah Brandt, a man they tried to erase, justice didn't come in the form of a verdict. It came in the sound of a name being spoken with honor, again. Judge Monroe rose slowly from his kneel. His voice cracked, but his hands no longer trembled. He turned to the courtroom clerk and said firmly, "Vacate the conviction, expunge the record, release his property, effective immediately." The courtroom was silent until he added, "And add the name Elijah M. Brandt to the Hall of Honor under those who served with distinction." A quiet tear rolled down the cheek of the clerk, the same one who had, just weeks before, read the charges against Elijah without even meeting his eyes. Now she stepped forward, holding the duffel bag, not like evidence, but like a sacred artifact. "I'm sorry," she whispered, placing it into Elijah's hands. Elijah didn't say anything. He just held it close to his chest, like a part of himself had finally come home. Inside that battered bag were photos, medals, letters from his unit, and a citation so old the edges had curled. He never showed them to anyone before, not because he was ashamed, but because no one ever asked. Until now. As Elijah walked out of the courtroom, people stood, not out of obligation, but out of respect. Reporters didn't shout questions, they lowered their cameras, the world was watching. But for once, it was watching right. Because this wasn't just a legal correction, this was a reckoning. We talk about justice like it's a scale, but sometimes it's a mirror. And when we look into it, we're forced to ask, how many others like Elijah Brandt have we walked past? How many homeless veterans have names we'll never know because we never bothered to look? Today, the answer was different. Today, one name was enough to make a room full of strangers stand in silence. 1 week later, in the sunlit rotunda of Lexington's Hall of Honor, a new bronze plaque was unveiled. It read, "Captain Elijah M. Brandt, United States Marine Corps, Fallujah, Iraq, 2004. The man they almost forgot until they didn't." Children stared. Veterans saluted. A trumpet played low in the distance, and in the front row sat a man in a crisp suit donated by a local veterans group. Shoes shined, posture straight, duffel bag by his side like an old friend. Judge Monroe stepped to the podium. Today, we don't just honor a soldier, we confront our own silence. We failed to see a hero standing in front of us, and yet, he never stopped carrying his truth. He stepped down from the microphone, walked to Elijah, and did something few expected. He saluted, slow, sharp, honest. One by one, the room followed, generals, children, strangers. Every hand rose across the hall until the silence was filled with something rare, dignity restored. Elijah stood, eyes damp, voice low. "I'm not special," he said. "I just wanted someone to remember that I existed." He looked at the plaque, then back at the crowd. "And now, you do." Elijah Brandt may have gotten justice, but for tens of thousands of others like him, no judge is kneeling. No name is being restored, and no one is watching. Because the real question isn't, how did this happen to Elijah? It's, how often does it happen? And we don't even notice. In the United States today, there are over 35,000 homeless veterans. Let that sink in. Men and women who once wore the uniform, who trained, deployed, bled, and survived, now sleep under bridges, in cars, in alleyways, behind fast food joints that won't hire them. And the reasons? They're not simple, but they are solvable. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Combat changes the brain. Hypervigilance, nightmares, depression, they don't end with a discharge paper. Lack of transition support. Once the uniform comes off, many veterans are handed a packet of brochures and little else. No job training, no mental health support, no meaningful human connection. Bureaucracy and red tape. Many who try to get help face wait lists, outdated systems, and people who treat them like statistics. Veterans report being turned away for missing a form while sleeping on the sidewalk outside a VA building. And let's talk about stigma. Say, homeless veteran, and what comes to mind? For some, it's pity. For others, suspicion. We say, they must have done something to end up like that. But ask yourself, would you say that about a man with shrapnel still in his spine? Would you say it about someone who jumped on a grenade to save his unit? Would you say it if you knew his name was Elijah? Because the truth is, they didn't fail us. We failed them. The system that trains people for war must also train them for peace. The country that calls them heroes must also treat them as such when the cameras are gone. And the citizens who clap at parades must still look a homeless veteran in the eye and say, "I see you, I remember you, you still matter." Yes, Elijah got justice, but justice isn't complete if it's rare, if it's a miracle, if it takes a courtroom twist to remind us what humanity should have done in the first place. We need more than apologies. We need policies, programs, empathy in action, because until every Elijah is given a name, a home, and a future, we are still living in a nation that forgets its bravest. Every name on a wall tells a story, but some names almost didn't make it there. Elijah Brandt was nearly one of them, almost forgotten, almost erased, until someone remembered. The morning light filtered softly through the arched windows of Lexington's Hall of Honor. The bronze plaques along the wall shimmered like memories carved into metal. Veterans stood shoulder to shoulder, some with canes, some in wheelchairs, all in silence. Children from the local middle school clutched little American flags. Reporters whispered respectfully from behind velvet ropes. At the center of it all was a new plaque. Brand new, but it looked like it had always belonged there. Captain Elijah M. Brandt, United States Marine Corps, Fallujah, Iraq. 2004, the man they almost forgot until they didn't. Elijah stood in the front row, his posture straight, his shoes polished, his duffel bag faded and stitched up, sat beside him like an old friend. He wore a suit gifted by a local veterans nonprofit, and on his lapel, a single silver star. Not to prove anything, just to say, I was there, and I'm still here. Judge Monroe approached the podium. "We gather not just to honor a soldier," he began, "but to confront our own silence. We let this man carry the weight of his service alone, and he never once asked us to. He simply waited for someone to look and remember." Then, in front of everyone, Monroe stepped down, walked toward Elijah, and gave him a crisp military salute. Sharp, steady, full of weight, and slowly across the entire rotunda, others followed. Veterans, teachers, students, even the janitor in the back of the hall paused, hand over heart, until the room was filled with raised hands and tear-glazed eyes, not out of pity, but pride. Not because Elijah needed validation, but because the world needed reminding. Elijah stood and looked at the crowd. His voice, though soft, carried through the room. "I'm not special," he said. "I just didn't disappear fast enough. I waited, hoping someone might remember I existed, and now you do." He turned to the plaque, placed his hand gently against the bronze path, and whispered names only he knew. "Foster, Levins, Ramos, Kyle, you're not forgotten either." Outside on the courthouse lawn, two boys stood reading the plaque. "Who was he?" one asked. The other shrugged. "A man they almost forgot, until they didn't." And just a few feet away, Elijah Brandt sat on a bench in the morning sun. Not as a ghost, not as a statistic, not as just another homeless veteran, but as a man, whole, seen, and standing tall. This story was about Elijah Brandt, but it could have been about any one of the thousands still out there, still waiting, still holding on. So if this story moved you, if it made you pause, made you feel, then don't let it stop here. Share it, talk about it, look around, because sometimes what a forgotten hero needs most is simply to be seen. If you believe stories like Elijah's deserve to be told, please consider subscribing, leaving a comment, and sharing this with someone who might need to see it. And if you've ever walked past someone on the street and wondered who they were, next time, maybe ask. You never know whose name is waiting to be remembered.